Teen Moon: How 400,000 People Landed Apollo 11 on the Moon by Catherine Timish. Essential question: how was the technology helped people learn about Earth and space? The year is 1969. After years of preparation, Apollo 11 is minutes away from being the first space expedition to land a man on the moon. With only 3,000 feet to go, a software alarm from Eagle, the lunar module LM, puts astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Mission Control on high alert. Then the Eagle was down to 2,000 feet. Another alarm, 1202. Mission Control snapped. Roger, no sweat. And again, and 1202. Then the Eagle was down to 700 feet, then 500. Now they were hovering helicopter-like, presumably scouting a landing spot. In 100 of practice simulations, they would have landed by now, but Mission Control couldn't see the perilous crater and boulder field confronting Neil and Buzz. Those things, coupled with the distraction of the alarms, had slowed them down. More than 11 minutes had passed since they started down to the moon. There was only 12 minutes worth of fuel in the descent stage. Telescope view showing the area of the Apollo 11 landing site, Tranquility Base. Analyze the text and graphic features. How does the close-up photo of the moon on this page contribute to your understanding of the moon expedition? An interior view of the LM cockpit showing the 16mm film camera out Buzz window. Almost empty, 60 seconds. Not 61, not wiggle room. No, just a couple more seconds. We are almost there and no second chance. They had just 60 seconds to land on the moon. Absolutely no one expected it to happen. They painstakingly planned so it absolutely couldn't happen. But here they were, less than 500 feet from the moon, and just about plumb out of fuel. Robert Carton, the control position on Mission Control, who was in charge of monitoring fuel consumption, among other things, had just sent the shocking 60-second notice through the voice chain up to the astronauts. Both Neil and Buzz knew when they heard the word 60 seconds, that was how much time remained until they had to abort, until they had to push the button, fling themselves away from the moon, never to land, or else they could possibly die. We wanted to give him, Neil, every chance to land, explained Robert Carton. So we wanted the LM, to be as near empty as it could possibly get. But on the other hand, we didn't want him to run out of gas then fit from the surface. That would have been a bad thing to do, you know. So you had to hit both. You wanted to make the mission, but you didn't want to jeopardize your crew, and you wanted to play it just as tight as you could safely. The heavier a spacecraft, the harder it is to launch. And fuel is heavy, so it was critical to pinpoint the fuel needed. Add a cushion, then take no more than necessary. But now, because the landing was taking far longer than planned, the fuel was almost gone. Mission Control wanted Neil to take as much time as he needed and fly the LM as near empty as possible, only because They wanted him to make the landing, but if he ran out of fuel above the surface, in all likelihood, the LM would crash onto the moon. So they were trying to time it to the last possible second before calling an abort, calling off the landing. If they aborted, if they flung themselves away from the moon, never to land, they would be slung into lunar orbit, where they would meet up with Mike Collins in the command module and head home to Earth. If they landed, though, leaving the moon wouldn't be a problem because there was a full tank of fuel in the ascent stage for lift-off. An abort also used the ascent stage, but the ascent and descent stages were completely separate. When the supply for the descent stage was empty, that was it. Sharing fuel was not an option. In every simulation, the LM had been landed well before the low-level sensor was tripped, indicating 120 seconds of fuel left. Bob Nance's backroom port for control was calculating the seconds of fuel remaining on his paper strip chart. Flight director Gene Kranz would write in his memoir, "I never dreamed we would still be flying this close to empty and depending on Nance's eyeballs." Bob Carton backed up the backup with a stopwatch. 30 seconds. Now would not be the time for the two Bobs to miscalculate, miscount, or lose their superhuman powers of concentration. They could not afford to be wrong. When we tripped low level, things really got quiet in that control center, recalled Bob Carton. We were nervous, sweating. Came to 60 seconds, came to 30 seconds, and my eyes were just glued on the stopwatch. I didn't see the control center as a whole. The system could have fallen apart at that instant, and I wouldn't have known it. I was just watching the stopwatch. 18 seconds. Click. Analyze the text. Domain-specific vocabulary. The author used several technical words. Why do you think she has chosen to do that? How can you determine their meanings? People were concerned about the amount of fuel you had left. The master's alarms. I don't believe anybody in the room breathed for the last 5 minutes. We are just hanging on every word and try to force the vehicle down by sheer willpower. Get down, Neil, get down, turn off that engine. Charlie Mars, Chief Lunar Module Project Engineer, listening in on a headset in one of the back rooms at the Mission Control Complex. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin from the LM. You know it's real when you walk in to the Mission Control building. Then you sit down and start doing what you've done 100 times and it becomes surreal. You don't know or care if it is real. You are just doing your thing. And then all of a sudden it doesn't go quite the same. Somebody calls out something that brings you, wakes you up and says, "It is real." And what happened when he said, "We've got some dust"? We'd never heard that before. AGC Jack Garman, Emission Control. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Apollo 11 Commander Neil Armstrong from the LM. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We are breathing again. Thanks a lot. "I was so excited," Duke later said, "I couldn't get out Tranquility Base. It came out sort of like Tranquility." Capcom and astronaut Charlie Duke in Mission Control. Frozen Slug. After 8 challenging years of countless hours, man was finally on the moon. Flight director Gene Kranz would soon go around the horn for the very first no-stay decision. You know, they landed and everybody's cheering and everything, and then all of a sudden somebody noticed that something's gone wrong. Temperatures building up. Uh-oh, it shouldn't be like that, explained Grumman engineer manager John Carson. Up went the temperature in a fuel line on the descent engine. Up went the pressure. Rocket science rule number 1: do not allow the fuel to become unstable. Instability equals unpredictability, and unpredictability is just another word for random explosion and all sorts of unwanted chaos. Engineers John Carson, Manny Dadrich, and a whole lot of others sprang into action back at the Grumman plant in Bethpage, New York, where Carson was stationed. There was a frenetic burst of engineering pandemonium. From table to table, rushing blueprints and schematics unfurling, telephones dialing, telephones ringing. "Do you remember that one test? What about when such and such happened? Remember when so and so talked about? Any ideas?" At 300 degrees, the fuel was quickly approaching its 400-degree instability rating. Engineers at Grumman and their counterparts at NASA in Houston, like Grumman manager Tom Kelly, simultaneously deduced the likely culprit: a slug. A solid slug of frozen fuel had trapped a small amount of the descent fuel in the line. This caused the temperature and pressure in the line to rise rapidly and dangerously. First thing we did was get the drawings out so you could see, recalled John Carson. All kinds of functional diagrams, say, of the heat exchanger, the line that runs from there to the valve of the tank. You want to get all of the data before you can. And that's the purpose for having a good call room back at the plant, because there is more data there that the people didn't take with them to Houston. Up went the pressure, the temperature, now 350 degrees, terrified of an impending explosion. Even a small blast could damage vital engines or components. Carson and the Grumman engineers argued their options. They could board now and leave the problem on the moon. The slug was isolated in the descent stage, and lift-off relied on the separate ascent stage. The descent stage, no longer necessary, would be left behind, or they could try to burp the engine, give the valve a quick open-close to release the build-up pressure. The trouble with option 2 was that venting might push the fuel to an unstable condition, or another possible outcome of the burping. What if the landing gear hadn't deployed correctly? Could any movement or any resulting burst, no matter how small, tip the LM over? Many of the voices in the debate thought the safest option was to abort now, but that opinion was quickly overruled by Grumman and NASA leadership, who were confident of the landing gear. and the consensus of the leaders was that it would be safe to gently burp the engine. Analyze the text, style and tone. How does the author's words choice maintain a consistent tone of suspense on pages 442 and 443? I'm going to step off the LM now. Neil Armstrong from the moon. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for the mankind. Neil Armstrong, first man on the moon. Suddenly, though, just as the procedure was about to be relayed to the astronauts, the pressure, the temperature dropped and stayed down. The frozen slug apparently had melted, probably due to the extreme heat in the fuel line. Problem solved, and only now a solid panic-stricken, gut-wrenching, heart-palpitating 10 minutes by clock, but feeling like an eternity later. Did it sink in for John Curson, Tom Kelly, and a lot of the other Greenland folks who had poured years of their lives into building the lunar module? Their baby was on the moon. Let the cheering begin.